Welcome, everyone. This is the Daughters of the Movement presentation. I'm delighted that you could join us today. And this event is featuring an extraordinary group of women whose parents changed the tides of history. Now, I'm Lauren Summers. I'm Senior Director of Lifelong Learning and Travel at the Yale Alumni Association. And today's event is being sponsored by two programs: the Yale Alumni Academy, which brings Yale's faculty, research, and scholarship to the alumni community through programs that happen online, on campus, and through travel. And our co-sponsor for this event is Yale Alumni College. That's another program which brings in-person learning experiences to alumni in 6 cities across the US. On behalf of both of these organizations, I want to extend a very warm welcome to all of you. We're really thrilled that you could be here with us today and to learn from these incredible women that we are about to meet. And with that in mind, I'd like to introduce our moderator for this discussion. She is Crystal Feemster. She is Tenured Associate Professor of African American Studies, History, and American Studies at Yale. She's the author of Southern Horrors, Women and the Politics of Rape and Lynching, and she teaches Yale's popular undergraduate course, The Long Civil Rights Movement. Crystal, it's great to have you here today, and I'm going to turn it over to you to get us started.
Good afternoon. And first of all, let me start by expressing my gratitude to the Yale Alumni Academy and the Yale Alumni College for hosting this event, and moreover to you, Lauren, and the Daughters of the Movement for inviting me to be a part of this conversation. I'm both honored and humbled and excited for this conversation. I want to begin by acknowledging that Keisha Sutton James, unfortunately, will be unable to join us this afternoon, and hopefully there will be another opportunity for you to see the Daughters of the Movement in action and get a chance to meet the delightful and inspiring Keisha Sutton James. I also want to note that Ilyasa Shabazz has to depart at 4:30, so we're going to enjoy hearing from her in the first 30 minutes, and I unfortunately have to see her slip away around 4:30. And on that note, I want to get down to the business of giving you the opportunity to hear from our guests today. So my introductions will be brief. They don't even begin to capture the amazing work and legacies of these women and their work and the work of their parents, but there are full bios online that Lauren has provided for everyone, and you can also check out the Daughters of the Movement website, so please don't hesitate to do that. But let's begin. I first want to introduce Gina Fonte, who is an archivist. She is the executive director of Sankofa.org, a nonprofit which educates, motivates, and activates artists and allies in service of grassroots movement and equitable change. She is the daughter of Harry and Julie Belafonte. Suzanne Kaye is a writer and a filmmaker. Her feature film, Cape of Good Hope, has won multiple awards, and she is currently working on a documentary about her mother, the late actress Diane Carroll, among many other projects. Stacey Renee Lynch is a candidate for the New York City Council in the 7th Ward. Woo! Go ahead, girl. She hopes to bring greater equality to government and to heal the divisions and wounds that exist in New York City. She is the daughter of Bill Lynch. Hassana Muhammad is a virtual artist, writer, and educator whose work focuses on family, social justice, and the human condition. She is a former fellow of the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture and the daughter of Ruby Dee and Ozzie Davis. Ilyasa Shabazz is an award-winning author, speaker, and educator. She is an adjunct professor at John Jay College of Criminal Justice in New York City, where she emphasizes empowerment and inclusion in her teaching. She is the daughter of Malcolm X and Dr. Betty Shabazz. Dominique Sharpton is an actress, producer, and activist. She is the National Director of Membership for National Action Network and works to engage the next generation of community activists and impact systemic change. She is the daughter of the Reverend Al Sharpton. So this is our amazing and wonderful panel. And I know, like many of you, when I heard about the Daughters of the Movement, I was like, oh my God, this is amazing and this is important and necessary. But I was really curious, like, how did this happen? How did this come into being? And so I'm hoping we can start our conversation with the daughters, telling us a little bit about how they came together and what they understood their mission in coming together was.
So it's all my fault. In 2013, my father passed away, and he was a giant figure in my life. And, I received support from some of my sisters on this call. Gina, I don't know if you remember, I think you were at the caucus, the Black caucus, and you sent me a text message that was so sweet. And it was during that time that I was kind of, I was making changes in my life. I started a new job. I started working in the mayor's office. And it was a tough period in my life. And at that moment, my instincts kicked in, and I knew I needed a safe space and a sisterhood. So I called my sister Gina, and I said, hey, I have this idea. I want to convene a bunch of smart, incredible women that have very similar life experiences. And I have a sponsor who will pay for our dinner. And they didn't know that I was the one actually paying for the dinner. Right? And so Gina said, I love the idea. And Gina reached out to Suzanne and some other folks. And then I called Keisha Sutton-James and pitched the same thing. And Keisha reached out to Ilyasa and Dom, and the rest is history. We have this incredible sisterhood that I'm really grateful for every day, every moment of the day.
And what makes it really beautiful is that it's a real sisterhood. I mean, it started out of a personal need, like Stacey said, and we started with dinner parties, dinner gatherings at homes or in restaurants. It really just meant to be for us. And then at some point, a subset of us, a group of us, realized that there was something here that we thought we should take out to the world. A multi-generational group of Black women in conversation might have some value in this world, and these are voices that aren't heard enough. So we switched over from it just being feeding us and our souls, and we decided to start doing panels and webinars and other things, that podcasts and other things we've been working on. It was all from Stacey.
But we kept having fun too, even though we were serious with our webinars. And it's interesting because we would talk about events and, oh, I was there, or your parents were there, and looking at our photo albums, all of our relatives are in each other's photo albums. So we really felt connected in that way.
I'm wondering if you could speak to the generational divisions. I don't want to call them divisions, but that you're all coming from different, you're at different ages in your life, right? So I imagine you bring different issues and concerns to the group. Some of you are probably new mothers maybe, or, thinking about all kinds of things, right? So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more along the lines in which Stacey talked about this was a moment for her where she needed the support of a sisterhood. And I know that in our conversations, we've talked about self-care, right, as being crucial to the work that you do, and that comes out of some of the lessons that you learned from your parents, from the lessons that you've learned in your own lives. And so I'm wondering if you could talk about how you have supported each other around these questions of self-care.
Who wants to take this one? Dom, take it. Come on.
I thought we was gonna let Ilyasa take it.
Oh, Ilyasa, take it.
More than one of you.
Turn on your mic, girl.
Drum it up, drum it up.
You're muted.
You gotta turn on your mic.
Ilyasa.
I'm sorry. I'm gonna pass the mic like the DJ does to Suzanne Kaye, because I think she's the one that provides you guys and all of us with self-care remedies.
Yeah.
Well, you're just talking about food. That's my thing. Well, food and mental health. It's not just me though, it's really all of us have different ways of approaching this. But we have, you know, she's the youngest. She will point out if I haven't said that first, she was gonna say it anyway, so I'm gonna say it. And she, you know, has a little one, she has a baby boy. And so there are some of us who have children in college or beyond. And so it's been really helpful. The mental health side of it is that we can share with one another, you know, what it's like going through transitions and how we've made it through. And then Dom keeps us younger, you know, or keeps us like, you know, it's a good mix.
Yeah.
Kind of.
He keeps us hip.
What was
I
that?
said you keep, yeah, you keep us hip. You keep us hip and in tune.
Yeah.
You know, it's more than just us being hip. I am the eldest of the group.
There you go.
I am usually the youngest in a group. I have an older brother and older sister, and most of my peers are older than I am. Not that you all are not my peers, and just right behind me, I see you there. But I think the intergenerational component adds some depth and dimension to what we represent. Very often, when one needs a multiple perspective, you need to look at the past, the present, and the future. And with us, you get those who are Dominique's age and all the way up to mine, and we're able to have more of a wider perspective on the civil rights movement, more than just the portion of it that I experienced as a little girl. It also includes what Dominique is doing as a young woman, and the civil rights movement of today. So having the generations enables us to bring a multiple perspective and a little bit more depth. And we all have children. Some of our children are quite grown, and others are, like we said, Dominique, she's got our little baby. But that's really key, the fact that we have this shared history that we can grapple from different ages and different, you know, perspectives. I think that makes a difference.
And I think like different experiences, like some of us on this call have parents who have transitioned on or are aging. And so, you know, we're able to relate in so many different ways. And I know as the second youngest sister, right? I truly appreciate just having the support from all of you.
Can I pick up on a thread here? Because I think, you know, the language that we use today of self-care, right? And I think you used the language of the safe space, Stacey, right? Is not the language of your parents' generation, right? And so I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about how they navigated, how kind of talk about what you learned from them. And some of those lessons were good. Some of them may not have been, you know, they may, you know, I want to talk a little bit about the context, right? Because we live in a really different world. And I'm wondering if you could talk about what it meant to grow up in households where you had parents who were doing this labor, right, within the civil rights movement without the framework of radical self-care or the framework of a safe space. I mean, we could talk about them creating courageous spaces, right? But they weren't always necessarily safe spaces. So I'm wondering if maybe, Ilyasah, if you could speak to this question, and then maybe all of you jump in a little bit to talk about what you learned from your parents and how that instigated what you're doing now.
I would call it radical institution building and radical self-love, especially in a household with 6 women, plus another one, 7. You know, what I really appreciated about my mother is when I looked at her, it appeared as if she was invincible. And it appeared as if, you know, she just had everything under control. But when I got older and became more introspective and retrospective, I saw like, how could she have had it all together? How could she have really been invincible? Because the challenges were tremendous. But one of the things that she made sure that she gave to our household is the importance of self-love. And it wasn't like she called it out, but as I got older, I recognized it and I understood, and I'm so appreciative, and it's the reason why I, for example, have gone into education and why I have written books. I think it is important for all of us, and the sisters, we talk about this a lot, that for my household, we learned about the significant contributions women, Muslims, and people of the African diaspora, indigenous people of color, first world land nations, all of these contributions that they made to history, so that we grew up with a solid sense of ourselves and didn't rely on others to determine our self-worth. And so it makes it easy for us to come together and love on one another, because we know how to love ourselves. And so I took that from my household and share it, amongst our sisters. This is, something that I think the reason why we are all able to come together and fellowship with one another in this sisterhood space of radical institution and radical self-love.
I love it.
Because it's true, because Elias's mother, I mean, it's true, because I'm a product of what she's talking about. Elias's mother was my godmother, Betty Shabazz. And when my sister Ashley and I were very young, I was born in 1986. So I was born in the wake of Bensonhurst and Howard Beach, and then Tawana Broadley and so many other things. It was a very controversial time for my father being a public figure. And Aunt Betty, instilled in my parents that Ashley and I, in order for us to face the world and all that came with it, we had to know who we were, and we had to be true to who we were and understand who we were in order to face the world. And so she had us enroll in our first school. We went to an all-Black school that was very specifically cultured to African culture. So we learned how to speak Yoruba, and we learned, how to develop concepts. And we read the New York Times at 9 years old, and, learning logic and rhetoric and just things of the African culture that, kept the family together and taught us about who we were and connected us to our roots. So that's a very strong statement to know who you are and to be an activist, to face all the challenges that comes with that, but to also know and be grounded in your faith. And that's one thing that I learned from my parents growing up, that I never really saw them shake to the controversy or shake to whatever was going on out there, because they were grounded in faith, and they instilled that in us, from a very young age, that the world and the work that we are doing is bigger than us. And we have to understand that when we go out in the world every day, that we are representing not only ourselves, but we're representing a generation of people, and we're representing the victory and promise of progress.
Yep.
And what that means. So that's a lot to take on. Yep. It's a lot to take on. So you've got to be grounded in something that that is deeper than what you can see.
Yeah, and just to add to what my sisters are saying, I for my dad, he was very involved in his work, but almost to his detriment, because he didn't understand self-care, right? And so that may apply to some of my other sisters' parents. I know in our community, we generally work ourselves to the bone and not think about ways to take better care of ourselves. And so, as a daughter, watching my dad be a political organizer or manager for some of the top leaders in the country, I saw what to do, right? And also what not to do. And, for for me, as someone running for political office, I'm very conscious of taking better care of myself and making time to take better care of myself.
Which is my favorite subject. I'm learning to eat.
I know.
You know, and I'm not the only one in the group who cares a lot about how we eat and all that, but I mean, really, it's something I think a lot of us care about. But it's become a thing we share, which is we try to be aware of the impact of the mind on the body. We try to be aware that what you put in your body, what you eat every day, food is medicine or it's poison. It's one or the other. And so, you know, we talk about this and try to support one another. I'm kind of almost vegan. I got every now and then I have some fish and I'm, you know, and I don't drink. So that's when I lose all my sisters when I say I don't drink. Everybody like disappeared on me. But in general, I think we're all trying to move toward the same goal, which is, and those of us on the upper end of this are aware that, you know, you make a choice now and you either go down that road where you're going to be getting medicine upon medicine upon medicine, or you go down that road where you start taking control of your health and questioning doctors and worrying about how you eat and being careful about how you eat. That's a big part. I just want to say one more thing and then I'll, you know, my mother, because she was doing Julia, she moved to California for that. So I lost touch with this sisterhood. I saw Gina every now and then because Gina's father would come out and we were in the same, our parents were in the same industry. So her father would come to Vegas and we would have time together in the summers sometimes. So I had Gina, but not all the time because she'd come back east. And that really took a toll. It took a toll on me and it took a toll on my mother. The loneliness and the isolation of Hollywood, especially when we started, which was the late 60s when the show started. It was not a welcoming place for Black women. And so when many, many years later, I get this call from Gina and Stacey and all this, for me, it was like the angels sang. I needed it so badly. I'm an only child and I've never had a sisterhood like this. And it just, I can't even begin to tell you. And then of course my mother passed away and all these things happened. But even before that, just gave me such a sense of strength. And it's never stopping. Every day I feel I'm getting more and more out of this sisterhood. So I just wanted to say that it's a gift that I guess our ancestors, our parents had something to do with it. I feel their hands on us all the time. Yeah. They're always up there kind of, don't you?
Yeah, can I jump on that for a second? And
well, Ilyasa is going to have to go in a second. So I want to just take a moment to let her sort of exit gracefully and also thank her, but give her a kind of transitional last word that I think will bring us back to this conversation, which is, before you go, Ilyasa, I'm wondering if you could speak to the legacies of your mom and your father's work and how that informed the work you do now.
Wow, okay. Well, let's see. There's so much to say about my parents because everything I do surrounds all of what I guess they've given to us and my father. His life, you know, cut short, as we are finding now that, you know, a lot of things about my father's life. But, you know, I went into education. I wrote books. I teach, very committed to inspiring critical thought amongst our young people. You know, we just left Black History Month, and I think it's extremely important to understand that African American history is American history, and that we should know that, and we should control that narrative. And in controlling the narrative, when we talk about slavery, we can put it in perspective that they weren't just slaves, but that they were descendants of refined and industrious African people, indigenous people. And had it not been for them cultivating this land, that most of us would not have the opportunity today to live in this land of milk and honey and call the United States of America our home. So I think controlling the narrative is extremely important. Having a sisterhood is really, really important. Identifying people where you have shared goals, values, all of those things are really, really important. And when we hear that proverb that it takes a village to raise a child, we can do a better job in raising our children and making sure that our education curriculum is intact, because if the terrorism of slavery and the subsequent massacres of the Black Wall Street, the Rosewood, and what's the other one, Hasna? Was it Rosewood and Tulsa, are taught in a high school US history classes as American as the Boston Tea Party, then we would know that our education is based on historical facts, and more citizens would understand the necessity for reparations, and the list goes on and on. And so I say, let's control our narrative. Let's continue to roll up our sleeves as we've been doing since this summer. Since young people, this generation has become more politicized, let's roll up our sleeves and make sure that America really gives liberty and liberty and justice for all, as they promise. Thank you, guys. I'm so happy to be here with you. And so sorry.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Ilyasa.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And I want to apologize, Hasna, for interrupting you, but I wanted to create that segue. But I know that you're going to bring us back. So please go.
And we're so grateful for Ilyasa's commentary and her sisterhood. We really are. I just wanted to kind of bring it back to the question that you asked about our parents and their generation and how they experienced the self-care. And I'm going to do so by just highlighting the relationships among us, because back when our parents were doing their work, they didn't have the freedoms that we have. They were fighting for those freedoms, actually. And it was an unsafe space for them. We talk about walking while Black or driving while Black, and that is still the case now, but it was much different then. We're talking about the Jim Crow time, and as well as during the enslavement of African folks. But our parents knew each other, and they stood and worked shoulder to shoulder, arms locked. It was Gina's dad who very often was calling my dad and say, hey, Asa, you got to come on here. And Ruby, you got to come and do this. Paul Robeson is here and he's doing such and such. And they worked together with Gina's mother as well. Then my mother and Suzanne's mom worked together, and they had this sisterhood, because at that time, self-care was more of a luxury than we might think of it now. Mm-hmm. Now we might consider it a necessity. We know that it's a necessity, but back then to them, it was more of a luxury. And so they didn't have anyone else to turn to. I know my mother was very active in getting African-American hairstylists and makeup artists in Hollywood, because folks didn't know what to do with our shades of skin. And very often they had to do their own hair and their own makeup, and they had to be their own support systems. So Ilyasa's parents were in our lives also when Dr. Betty needed the most support I'm sure she needed in her life. It was my mom, Juanita Poitier, Sidney Poitier's first wife, as well as many other women who banded together and made sure that Dr. Betty had what she needed to care for her children. And although Keisha's not on the line, Keisha's grandfather was involved with the Shabazz family and involved with Stacy's legacy as well. So I just wanted to make sure that we realize that the self-care we talk about now is not the same as what our parents had to go through. They had to go through some rough stuff in order for us to be able to have the ability to show to take care of ourselves. And they had to rely on each other. And our legacies are intertwined, and it shows how much that shoulder to shoulder, arm to arm really enabled them to survive. You know, you see the marches with King, you know, with the arm to arm, it was a survival tactic as well as the way to walk across a bridge or the many other places that they walked. And Dominique, you did that walk. And Gina, you were kind of quiet there.
I was thinking about, I teach how your father, Gina, at a moment when a lot of the civil rights activists were at their lowest point, right? Fannie Lou Hamer and whatnot, he sent them to Africa, right? Paid for them to travel and to get out of this country to kind of rejuvenate in some ways. So I'm wondering if you could take a moment to talk about the legacies of your father and how that has influenced the work that you do today.
Thank you. I've just been having such a beautiful time sitting back and listening to my sisters and hearing, you know, we've done a few of these gatherings, and the stories and the sharing never gets old. It just gets richer and deeper, and we learn more about each other. And so I echo so much of what has been said today. And, you know, my relationship, first of all, to self-care is also a little different because my father's career, a lot of his career was touring. And so he would make sure that as often as he could, his tours were when we were not in school, and that in his contractual agreements, there was downtime in the places and spaces that we went to. So I was gifted the good fortune as a young person and a young adult to travel the world, and for him to have pause in those spaces for us as a family to learn more about the indigenous ways and the people and the government and the politics of all of those places, whether it was in the Caribbean or whether it was in Europe or Japan or wherever it was that I had the good fortune to travel with him on his tours. And yes, Suzanne and I actually would come together almost every summer for about a 6-year period, because our parents would either at the same time or in succession of each other play in Las Vegas. And my father, I think perhaps because we grew up in New York and perhaps because he saw an opportunity there, but he would also then play in Los Angeles for a good month at a time. So Suzanne and I would spend like 2 months, almost the entire summers together at times. And that was where we, and also our birthdays are a day apart. And it's, you know, there's a lot of beautiful, beautiful memories of our early childhood and growing up and doing, like, you know, young adolescent fun things, you know, in the midst of such wild and crazy spaces and places where we would find ourselves.
And your dad was introducing the world to South African music. When we would be, was that at the Greek Theater? Where were we?
Yes, it was at the Greek Theater. I mean, you know, my father, so to that point, as far as it relates to the civil rights movement, I think as my father learned about what protections he needed in his own contractual agreements as an artist, he wanted to make sure and ensure many of his social justice activist friends were also looked after and taken care of. And so, yes, there was a time in the 60s when, I think it was right after Freedom Summer, when everyone was really devastated by the deaths of Schwerner, Goodman, and Cheney, that he saw a lot of the young people in a very low point. And it's really interesting to say young people because all of our parents were young at that time, right? So they also were young. But he saw the need and wanted to expand and gift some of the civil rights workers from SNCC in particular the opportunity to reap the benefit of what he was given in relationship to one of his femtors, who was Eleanor Roosevelt. And Eleanor Roosevelt really engaged my father around the issues of the liberation of the different countries on the African continent. And so he then gifted, I think it was about 17 SNCC workers, and they went to, I believe it was Ghana, and they were able to meet with Sekou Touré. And I remember the stories when they came home, and that Fannie Lou Hamer, you know, just everyone being so overwhelmed to meet a president who was Black, and to see a country that was so Black, and also to see the struggles and to see deep, deep division and poverty. And it gave it a worldly context for them. And I think that as it informs my work today, I'm able to also engage internationally and also work in communities to shine a light on the issues that they are, in fact, desperately trying to survive through, and sort of elevate the consciousness of our people to understand, and sort of, as Ilyasa was saying, in terms of our history, but also to know what's happening with us in the present, which isn't always reflected in the news, because we also have a lot of really beautiful and wonderful things that our communities of color are doing and engaging in. A lot of that is around cultural organizing.
Uh-oh, that's, someone has a double thing on, I think.
But anyway, so I just say all of that to say that my mother was really the one who engaged me the most at an early age. She had me sit around the table. She had me lick the stamps and stuff the envelopes and listen to what was happening. It was almost like, instead of it being like a knitting circle or a crocheting circle, it was a social justice activism circle. And I was able to, as we all were able to, you know, really listen and lean into some of those conversations, half the time not even knowing really what was happening, but just absorbing all of that energy, all of the way in which they sort of enacted together. And, you know, my home was often a space where the community and some of the leaders in particular could just relax and have a really great meal and feel like they didn't have to be on, and could really talk about some of the deepest concerns. I can only imagine how that was also the way it was in Hasna's home with Auntie Ruby and Uncle Ozzy, and just really, you know, having people coming in and finding refuge in our homes and in our spaces. So I'm gifted always in this sisterhood, and being able to lean in and lean on and be there also for support. And, you know, we counsel each other regardless of our age. We help support each other so deeply in our work and in our dreams. I heard a saying from a South African poet, a young woman, and I can't remember her name, but she said, "Our dreams deserve our courage." And it feels like our sisterhood, in fact, helps us realize much of our dreams and much of the things that we hope to bring not only to each other, but to our communities.
And Gina was talking about how giving respite to some of the leaders, we also, you know, some of them were hiding out. You know, I remember, I remember waking up one morning, you know, as a teenager, you go into your siblings' room and try to get their clothes out of the closet and make a nice snazzy outfit. And I went into my sister's room, and there was a man sleeping in her bed. So I said, okay, she was off to college. And then I went into my brother's room to get a belt or something like that. There was a man sleeping in his bed, and he was off to college. I went downstairs in the living room. On the way out, there's two folks sleeping on the couches. And I came home later to find that my parents had given refuge to some Black Panthers. So, I mean, our homes were, were a lot of things for the movement, absolutely. And we were there.
You know, it's a story I don't think I ever told you about my father, who was white Jewish. He was he founded Birdland. He was one of the co-owners of Birdland, the jazz club, and Royal
He
Roost.
gave my dad his first break.
And he gave Harry Belafonte his first opportunity to sing, I believe at the Royal Roost, or one of the clubs.
Royal Roost.
At the Royal Roost.
Mhm.
But at one point, I remember my dad had a good friend who had a piece of property. Yalapa was this island, I think it was Mexico or something. And I came downstairs and I remember, my dad was talking about this, that they were talking about how to get Huey Newton to Yalapa. Basically, it was when Huey Newton had to get out of the country. And they were plotting it. I mean, they were discussing how this was going to happen. So, these were just things that would be, I guess, sort of not commonplace, but I mean, it's just part of what your parents did. And they never made a big deal out of it. They never talked about it. I figured it out. I'd put 2 and 2 together and then read about the fact that Huey Newton had escaped the country. And then I figured it out, but they didn't sit down and talk about it. People just did things. I think that's the truth about all of our parents. They just did it. Yeah. And we were observers often.
Yeah. There's also my father knew that he found out that Dr. King didn't have a life insurance policy. So he bought a life insurance policy for Dr. King to ensure that if anything should happen to him, his family would not be, on the street, because social justice activism is not very lucrative work, shall we say. Nowadays there are a lot of social justice activists, many of us included, who can get paid for speaking engagements and get paid to make appearances or write books that sell, and that just wasn't the case in those days. And so, I think that, all of our parents were always doing their best to find ways in which to look out for each other and share best practices in terms of how to protect each other as much as they possibly could.
I want to take a second to talk a little bit more about the connections between your parents' work and your present day work. Because I think, oftentimes when I'm teaching my students, they think of, okay, social justice activists are like activists, and they have this very narrow definition of what an activist is, right? That it's like, oh, you go out and you do marches, or you're organizing, or they have a singular vision of King as the kind of activist, right? But if we take all of your bios and we take the bios of your parents, what we see is that social justice activists come in all shapes and forms, and they engage in that work through art, through ministry, through politics, right? And that there are multiple ways to do through education, right? So I'm wondering if you could talk a bit about how we make visible not just the legacies of your parents in their own fields, right? But also the work that you're doing today, right? So we have Stacy, who's running for office. We've got Dominique, who's an actress. We've got, you all are doing different things. So I'm wondering if you could speak to the work you're doing and how it speaks to the diversity of what can be done around social justice. And there's not just one way to do this work.
Go ahead, Dominique.
All right. So yes, I'm an actress, producer, but I also am very committed to ensuring that the next generation of activists are informed, are supported, okay, and are connected to where they come from. And so my dad, always talks about, he's very committed to, mentoring the next generation of activists and leaders and what that looks like for the future and making sure that the movement doesn't die. That's very important. And that can also be, misinformed through technology and through the way that we get information so accessibly now, at the touch of our fingers. And so information and history can, really be, translated incorrectly if we are not a part of telling the story, and we are not a part of igniting and activating the next generation to do what it is that they got to do to keep this going, keep this fight going, because we know that it will continue. And so one of the things that I am very committed in doing is, and one thing that I am always talking about is National Action Network's Youth Huddle. And we have a group formulated through National Action Network, the organization that my father founded in 1991, that's committed to really fighting injustice all over the world, fighting for justice and equality for all who deserve, and what the next generation of activists and leaders look like. And that is engaging them on history, on civil rights history, engaging them on how demonstration affects legislation, engaging them on how we can be present at the table, talking about issues that affect young people, homelessness, housing, technology, education and equality. There's so many things that affect young people today that they can be empowered to be a part of the change that they wish to see. And so we have formulated this group. We meet virtually and in person, depending on where we are. And we have this outlet for young people to learn and to be connected to history and to the movement and to what we are doing on the ground to really promote change. And so that is one thing that I am doing. I'm also involved in making sure that we tell our stories. So there are the stories that we're hearing now and the stories that our individual lives that we've experienced in our family and in our communities growing up. We want to make sure that those stories are transpired to the big screen and that they're told correctly, that our history is being told correctly by us. And so those are things that I'm very, very passionate about. And that's how Dominique Sharpton, continues the work that people before me, Reverend Sharpton and those before me, have fought so hard to continue.
I just have to say, I'm super, super proud of my little sis, Dominique Sharpton. To be honest with you, Crystal, when you asked that question, I had like an aha moment, right? Because, you know, my father, in his way, I guess, was an activist in government. And you never think that someone in government could be an activist. And so, you know, thinking back on his career and my career, you know, you could say that I am also an activist in government, right? Fighting for the people, fighting for what I think is right, fighting for the underserved, under-resourced communities of color. And so, you know, my activism has grown in a different way, in an untraditional way, I guess. When people often think about activists and activism. And so that has led me to be an activist in public office, right? And really pushing for legislation and policy and, you know, administrative choices that work for communities of color and that really spreads equity across the city.
See, you are part of a long tradition, right? I mean, if we think about Mississippi, you know, Democratic Party.
Right, right.
That, you know, the Black people have understood that, you know, we have to be, that politics matter and that we have to be engaged in politics.
Absolutely.
In the state. And, you know, Obama was very like running on his grassroots.
Listen, Obama, if we really think about it, Shirley Chisholm, right?
Exactly.
If we really think about it, right?
Yeah. And I think though, Stacey, that we often forget that like artists, actresses, and
absolutely
and entertainers are doing that work as well. And so like I think for my students, when they're thinking about how they want to be activists or continue the legacies, law school is like a clear path, right? Law school and the path. Sometimes we can get them to think about being educators, but they often think, oh, can you be an activist educator? Or are you selling out, right? You know, and they are part of a generation where there's Beyonce is like making radical music, right? that we can't think about like a Lovecraft without thinking about Black, Black intelligence and brilliance
Right.
and
Right.
production. So I'm wondering if, Gina or Suzanne
Yes, absolutely.
can speak to how these other forms of protest are important.
Yeah, I mean, it's so funny because Stacey, you said I had an aha moment, and I had an aha moment as you were speaking, because I started to think about the word activist and why we are considered activists and what we are fighting for. And I'm kind of like, I take such pride in being an activist, right? But at the same time, I'm wondering if there's something for us to reclaim in this. And I'm thinking this right now on the fly. So I'm not married to what I'm about to say in any way, but I'm just wondering, like, why is it that we're labeled an activist when what we're requesting and asking for is something that is just human decency and what we all as human beings deserve? The activist part of it is the going out there and getting it part. And I don't know, I'm just thinking about this reclaiming of our work and of words, and because language is so important. Because often activists get like a bad rap. Like when you say, oh, I'm an activist, they're like, oh no, they are an activist, kind of a thing. And I take great pride in being an activist. And in fact, that's why I call myself an artivist, because I'm also proud of being an artist. And I'm also tired of having to be defined by one word or two words. And so I chose one word to try and encompass two things. I do my best to use art as a tool. And someone recently asked me a really interesting question. They were like, what are some questions, or what would you say to your younger self? I thought, well, I think I would say, relax. I think I would say, take everything and nothing seriously. I think I would ask myself the questions, what am I good at? What brings me joy? And how can I combine those two things and be of service to my community? Because then everybody's winning.
Yeah.
And so with that being said, I am the executive director of a nonprofit organization that's founded by my father that works with artists and allies in service of grassroots movements and equitable change by using art as a tool to amplify messages around mass incarceration, juvenile justice, immigration, income disparity, and violence. So we talk about war, we talk about domestic violence, we talk about eco-violence. And we use art as a tool to shine a light, to more deeply inform and educate our communities, especially of color, and to enlighten and engage allies so that they have a deeper understanding of the truth, while also experiencing something that opens the heart and opens the mind, which in some ways, some of the other ways in which activism takes place is hard to do, because as we've noticed, I call it the disease syndrome, which is probably not a really good thing to call it, but it's until someone is deeply affected by something personally, they kind of like have a little bit of like, oh, that's a shame, I'm going to send $5. And by the way, send $5, like, that's awesome. But there's also no barrier to entry to activism. There's no barrier of entry to participate and be of service to your community, to your neighborhood, to your family, to yourself. When we were talking about self-care, that is important, because we have to care for ourselves if we're going to care for other people. Otherwise, we can't really 100% show up for anybody else if we're depleted, if we're feeling exhausted, So I work as a producer, as an actor, and as a director. One of the things that I've got coming up is a audio production of For Colored Girls Who Have Considered Suicide When the Rainbow Is Enough. And I was going to do a presentation of it, and then realized what the community really needs, that I noticed in the audition process as a director, was we really need to do a workshop of this. We really need to dive into the text. We really need to bring up and bring to life what Ntozake Shange as an author was trying to convey, was trying to bring to light. and talk about not only as it was in that period that she wrote it in the 70s, but how are we seeing some of these same things today? What has shifted? What has changed? And the community is longing and is so desirous of being in dialogue and being in conversation. So
Yeah,
that's my job.
Art has always been our way, art kind of goes behind your defenses. That's what's so powerful about art, right? We're so divided now and everybody's got their opinions, but art can just sneak behind all of that and just touch you, as Gina was saying, in the heart, and so never underestimate art as activism, and it's funny, when this group first formed, there was a part of me was saying, was my mom's way of going through the world activist? And I was corrected by my sisters very quickly. And I realized, of course it was, but she wasn't out on the streets marching, except when Uncle Harry called her and she went to the March on Washington, of course. And, she was involved with SNCC, and we had Shirley Chisholm fundraisers and all this, but she wasn't, in my mind, the typical, but it's
Huey
not
Newton. I'm sorry, there was a little Huey Newton in there too.
And Huey Newton, Huey Newton came to the Shirley Chisholm fundraiser, or he never showed up. I was actually waiting for him. But anyway, but my mother was very careful about, it's interesting, she and Aunt Cicely spoke right before my mom passed. And, everyone knew that as a dark-skinned woman, Aunt Cicely was very careful about what roles she chose. And that was that was clear activism. I mean, so many people were affected by the kinds of roles Cicely Tyson chose, right? And my mother as well, she chose in a different way, but there are certain roles she would not take. And then there are other roles that she took, and she always had that way of kind of walking in the room like she owned the room, and like anybody sitting at the table, she didn't have to ask for a seat there. They needed her there. She had this real sense of herself. Whether she was faking it sometimes or not, I don't know, but it certainly convinced me, and I think convinced the world, that she belonged, more than belonged, and that was her activism. I actually took a little bit of time to fully see that. And there were times when Black America didn't see that, to be honest. And she was criticized, but looking back over it, I think her decision to live by her own terms, not even let the Black community sometimes define who she might date or what role she might take, took a kind of courage and took a toll. It definitely took a toll as well. And now, of course, in retrospect, I realize, that is definitely. To speak to your question, there's so many different ways you can go about this, but you always have to have courage. I would say that's kind of a through line here. No matter what you're doing, you're going to do something that's not in the straight lane. You're going to end up, Stacey, if she's going to do activism in government, it means she's going to risk opening her mouth and not getting endorsed by someone, or not getting the money, or not getting something because she stands for something. So I think that's the thing, no matter what arena you're in, you've got to stand for something and be willing to take that cost.
I just want to add, there's a role for everyone. Even within this group, there are legacies of strategists, as well as attorneys, as well as upfront leaders, as well as, back of the house folks. It takes everybody to contribute to this movement. Certainly, my parents were artists and activists. They used their art as a platform for their activism and building capacity in others. And I have, as a visual artist, used my art as activism, but it shows up more, I believe, in my role as an educator. So Dr. Feemster, just tell your students, education is justice. You cannot have justice without education. Right. And I believe that education is the next, the next rung on the ladder of things that we need to do. We need certainly to take care of police brutality and mass incarceration and food insecurity and many of the things that came along in 2020 with the economic crisis as well as the health crisis. Education needs to be right up front, and teachers, educators, whether it's in private school, public school, higher ed, are activists. They make a difference, they shape lives. And one of the things I've been asked in my education role, what is it that we need now, 21, 22 school year? And we need to come back into our classrooms looking at children as families. We need to be strategic about what we're going to teach them. And we have to make sure that we have relationships, build relationships. So, you were talking about your students, whether they're going to go to law or go to education, and there is a disparity in the money. There's no doubt, and that needs to be fixed. But education, without a doubt, 100% is activism. You cannot have justice without education. And please give that personal message to your students from me.
I will, and I will encourage them to watch this. And I think this is a good moment to transition to some of the questions from our audience. But I do want to sort of bring together a couple of the kind of last thoughts that you guys had, because I think they're important and require reiteration. And I think the question of like what it means to be an activist, and that language is important, right? And this idea that it requires courage to act. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And that if we want social justice, if we want equality, if we want democracy, as Black people, we know those are not givens, right? That they are not static categories. They require us to act, to move in action, and so we have to be activists if we are Black people and we want to live with human dignity and human rights, right? So for me, the word is one that is powerful. It's not just a noun, but that in its naming, it calls out that we have to act, and that an action is required. And so whether that's through art, whether it's through education, whether it's through politics, right? Whether it's through performance, whatever ministry, that we are all called to act in the name of justice. So on that note, I do want to kind of turn us to questions are coming in, and I have okay, so here's one, and you can decide if you want to, who wants to go for it. And so the question is, how did you get through growing up in the shadow of activism, controversy, and attacks and inaccurate portrayals of your parents?
I can talk about that.
Go ahead.
I mean, it's basically there every day. I mean, I can't wake up without seeing something crazy written about my dad, my family, myself. I mean, it started from when we were little. I mean, I think that from just growing up into this, you realize, I mean, I witnessed seeing my dad being stabbed, leading a protest when I was before I was even 8 years old. So I knew from a very early age that, this was something that, again, extends beyond our family. And it's something that we had to have a deep root of faith in order to sustain a lot of the controversy and just attention that was swarming around, because of my dad, taking that courageous effort and standing up for what he believed in. And that is not wrong. That is okay. And you need to understand that once you reach a certain status or level, and what that means is that you have gotten under the skin of those who are powerful and influential, and you have started to really shake the atmosphere, as they say, of what it is and what conversations should be on the table and what we should be really focused about as it relates to the progression and equality and justice for all people as we fight for on a daily basis. But seeing these stories and things, sometimes, I mean, now I just kind of have to laugh at it, because I know that they're not true. I know that, you know, my father is, you know, very committed to doing this, and he believes it with all his heart, that he is willing to die for his people. And I understand what that means, literally. And so it comes with the territory. It's like, if you get out there and you fight for what's right, you gotta be able to take what that comes with. And so if you're gonna be weak, you know, this ain't the job for you. If you are going to be a crybaby, this ain't the job for you. You know, if you are going to be able to be overturned and turned and dismissed and disrespected and not be able to take that, then you can't fight the justices and the powers that be on a level that will mean real systemic change. And so we saw all the leaders go through it. I mean, I don't think anyone has not had to go through, you know, actually having to live your life on the outside, as we say. And so you just gotta go roll with the punches. It's like, what they gonna come out with next, you know? And at the end of the day, we have to understand that that is only a tactic to divide us, to keep us from not moving forward, to keep us from not believing in each other, and to keep us from not believing in the collective, in what the power that we have as individuals, to come together and really make things happen. And so if they can keep us united, they can keep us divided, and they can keep progress from continuing to move forward. And so we can't just have that. We can't stand for that. We got to keep going no matter what. I hope that answered your question.
I'm assuming it answered it for me, but I don't know if others want to jump in and respond to this question, or should I take another one?
Well, I just want to say, not for any one of us personally, but I do know that our parents have multiple personas. They have the public persona, and then they have that private persona. And the private persona, that's what we saw. We were there when they came home, after they were at the rallies and the marches and doing what they needed to do. When they came home to us. And I know, while we can each speak about our parents independently, I do know that our parents were very loving, generous, peaceful people, all of us, all of them. And as radical or militant as some folks might think our parents have been, they were very peaceful, loving people.
Human beings.
Human beings at the end of the day, who loved their families and who loved the people. It was, and I think that's a misconception I think that people have, that these powerful leaders are that way all the time, or that there's this aggressive tone, and that's not always the case. I believe that the peaceful component of them is a major component of their legacies.
I would agree with that, but I would also say that, and just from my experience, I remember, I produced a documentary film on the life of my father called Sing Your Song. And in that documentary, my brother very emotionally answers a question and says, my dad had, and I'm paraphrasing his answer, but the gist of it was, my dad had two families. There was us, and then there was the family of man. And my father, in his activism and in his life, I would say, I did not experience the level of unconditional love I think that perhaps may have existed, or perhaps other sisters here have experienced. I know my father is extremely proud of me, and I know that he loves me very much. But I will also say that our household was not always peaceful. I think that the toll that some of the work took, some of the fear that it was instilled, our house was bugged, our telephones were tapped, there were bomb threats on flights and things. I mean, there was real stuff going on. And yes, my parents both did their best to protect us as children, but I was witness to the toll, and I was witness to the fear sometimes. And some of that fear translated into anger. And while I wasn't always a recipient of it myself, I will say that, just keeping it 100, that, at least in my experience in my family, it was a very dynamic and tumultuous experience. And my parents both, thank God, were in therapy, for a good portion of their lives for over 50 years. They needed a place and a space and an outlet. And when you think of people like Dr. King, who was denied the opportunity because of what it would look like
Yeah.
if he was in therapy, my parents in particular, they needed an outside professional to sort of help them cope with some of the issues. And it was on a very dynamic scale. And it wasn't just around activism. It was also around the issues of celebrity and what that brought, and all the people that would come in and start to hover around, and who could you trust? And so it was extremely dynamic. And I would say sometimes volatile, sometimes tumultuous household that I grew up in. Both my parents, I'm very lucky to say, are both alive, and I have a great relationship with both of them, and they're both extremely loving to me and my siblings. But I just want to sort of keep it real and say that it wasn't all like, oh, it was really lovely at home when they came home. And also for me too, I think because of the nature of the kind of work that my father did, and Suzanne a little bit, but sometimes to a lesser degree as she got older, I went with my father up to a lot of these spaces. I think Stacy and Dom certainly must have had that same sort of kind of experience, and being on the front line sometimes with our parents, being in the mix of the dynamics of what was going on. So I just wanted to put that out there, so that, and I haven't really spoken that much about this, and it's so great to do these conversations because new things come up for us to share. But I also just wanted to show the dynamism, and that we're not a monolith,
Yeah.
all of us.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I mean, I used to be jealous of my imagination of Hessna's family. I thought Ossie Davis and Ruby Dee they just seemed as if they had this marriage that lasted so long, which is very rare in the entertainment industry, certainly. And I just thought, wow, they managed to have activism and all this in their home. But, I mean, never put anyone on a pedestal. In the end, people are human, and we all struggle. But I also had parents who were, my mother was married 4 times. It was very difficult to be a woman out there on the front lines, kind of on her own. And so, like Gina, my mother came home, and it was not a smooth kind of home life at all. And I think women alone trying to have a career, and you're Black, and it's activism, and you have a single child.
Suzanne, Suzanne.
Yes.
Sorry, I don't want to interrupt you. We had a cameo. Someone wanted to say hi.
Oh.
Yeah.
I love the
Sorry, Dr. Feemster. I know this is so inappropriate, but we had a visitor drop in.
Hey, Papa Sharpton.
Hi.
I had my first vaccine shot today, so I'm wandering around the office in a daze. So I just happened to stumble on Dominique. Everybody be safe, be good.
God bless you.
Please.
Oh, that was funny. She goes, okay, we had a guest.
Right, and it just illustrates how it's another side of Al Sharpton.
Yeah.
And that's basically, what I'm talking about. There's more than one side to our parents, and they have
Absolutely.
He really just wanted to check on me and make sure I was doing a good job. That's really what that was about.
Yeah, and he's very proud. There's more sides to our parents than what the public sees.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And I think, the other thing about, I was saying that, being a woman and all those things in her position, it was hard to be a parent as well. It was really hard to figure all of those things out. And I think, Uncle Harry, there was a sweetness I always felt about Uncle Harry when I would talk to him. At the same time, there's a toughness about Uncle Harry that was scared of scare me sometimes. You know, that's true. They're like the rest of us. They were multifaceted. You know, there was no way these people weren't tough or they wouldn't have succeeded. But at the same time, there would be moments when it would just be big heart. You know, you would see just so much, like you said, Hesna, so much love and so much heart. Look, they're complicated people. It was a little bit of all of it. And the
I'll
side
add
that you
this.
didn't see was often the struggle at home.
Yeah, and I'll add this, you know, to Hesna's point about the love shows up in different ways. I mean, my parents were always
Yes.
deeply concerned about us. So the
Yeah.
love is also not always what it, you know, looks like in everybody's household. And what that helped me understand more deeply, and to this day that I keep reminding myself of, is their own early childhood experiences and how they came up in the world.
Yeah.
And how were they loved upon, and what were they facing as children, and what was their home life like. And that helped me have a deeper understanding of the concept and the idea of when folks would say, well, they did the best they could. And I would, in
Yeah.
fact, say that absolutely both my parents to this day do the best that they can, because if they had the tools or the knowledge to do something better or differently, they would do it.
Yeah.
So I do know that, and that's always extremely comforting.
Especially when we have children and we want them to look at us with the same empathy.
Which I think there's a question that's very much linked to the issue of thinking about your parents as whole people, and with public lives and private lives. And so one person said, given that your parents had both a public and a private persona, did you find yourself creating your own public and private persona as you grew up?
Mm.
Yeah, and that actually is still forming, because I've had some moments, emotional moments, I'll just say, that have played negatively in the media just because of, you know, who I was related to. So, you know, you have these growing pains and learning who you are and how much, you know, you really visibly want to put out there. You know, you can kind of get caught in the mix, I think, of that. And for me, you know, those learning experiences had happened, and I was able to learn through them because they were very visible to the world, for the world to see, you know. So I think that is definitely a learning tool. You gotta, you know, learn who you are again, you know, to know how much you can take. And I'm a very emotional person. So I figured, you know, there's no better way for me than to exert my energy on film or on stage, where I can just let it out and it's accepted. Because you can't always be like that in every situation, in every setting. It doesn't call for that. So, you know, you just kind of find your way. And for me, you know, unfortunately, that was exposed a lot for the world to see.
Well, Dominique, I think it's interesting, and the historian in me is always wanting to anchor us in context and time and place. And I think it does matter that you're one of the younger one in the group, right? Because I think you're part of a generation where that line between public and private isn't always so clear.
Yeah.
In the world of social media and platforms and things like that, you know, yeah, the FBI and people were bugging and surveilling your parents, but the sort of Dominique's generation and your kids' generation, like, even if what people share about their personal lives, and even with Zoom, like, we're all up in each other's houses, in these boxes, right? So there's a line that gets blurred between the public and the private, and it's sometimes a false dichotomy, I think. And so it is this question, Dominique, of how much of your inner, not so much your bad,
You're out.
your inner being, how much of that your interiority do you want to make public, right? That we have to be able, and Black people have long struggled to maintain a kind of private interiority, right? That is always up to be pathologized, right? To always be made visible as these laboring, you know, oppressed bodies. So I think, you know, there's a lot in sort of thinking about the context between private and public and what that meant. But I still think we can speak to this question of what it meant to bear witness to parents who had to move in these spaces and create public and private lives, and how that affected you and the choices that you make about who you are and who, how the world, you want the world to see you.
Just to echo what you and Dom are saying, you know, my father had a different public life, and he was more so known in political circles, and not necessarily the media, which is a different animal in itself, to have a public life in politics. But my mom was very conscious and probably wise, right? Wiser than my dad at that time, to just ensure that her kids, their kids, were shielded from a lot of that stuff. And, you know, my mom, who is smarter than my dad, way smarter. I'm sure most of the women on this call can say that their moms are smarter, way smarter than their maybe public dads, right? She made a very conscious decision to keep our private life private. But to your point, Crystal, that also taught her daughter to be very guarded in public, right? And I'm very, like, up until recently, maybe, and when I say recently, like my 45th birthday a few days ago, right? I often would process and think about what I would say, how I would say it before it would even come out of my mouth. So there wasn't a level of comfort for me, because I was so obsessed with maintaining some level of privacy, you know, and
it's
in
almost
many
like
ways,
it's almost like speaking another language, you know. It's like
exactly,
people who don't speak English, they hear it first in
exactly
language, and then it comes out.
And then it comes out. Exactly. And
that's
part of
part of
that,
why Stacey created this group, is that it was a place where we could just let that down.
go.
We are
Yeah.
all deeply
Yeah.
trained. All of
Yeah.
us are deeply trained, and we don't even know where.
And we don't know it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How much.
You're also
Yeah.
holding the legacy. You're holding up the legacy.
You're carrying the
Yeah.
legacy.
You-
No
Yeah.
matter what you do, where you go, what you say, there's
You're
always
carrying.
a level of the
Yeah.
legacy there. And it's a blessing. Our legacies are blessings to us, but we live it. We carry it with us, and sometimes
Constantly. Yeah.
I mean, for me as a young person, and as it relates to identity, and all my sisters know this, I mean, I took on a whole separate persona. I was
Yeah.
like I was another race. I was like a whole other person. And I had, you know, because I grew up in the 60s and 70s, where my parents were sort of like, go out and then come home by dark or by dinner, whichever came
Yeah.
first. And so I was out in the streets of New York City just doing my thing. You know, a lot of the time when I was much younger, I was following my brother around. And then when I wasn't following him around, I would find my own group and my own circles. And I just took on a whole other persona. People did not know who my father was or what he did. And I was able to sort of have a double life in a way. And that lasted for a little while until I got older. And then it would just became more difficult to keep it separate, because entering into the world of the arts myself became a public person.
And you've
So
got that last name. You can't really hide from
You
that last
can't.
you can't help it.
Unless you switch. Did
I
you
don't know,
switch it
You know
up?
what I will say
Did you
about
switch it
that?
up?
I know I didn't. But what I will say about the last name thing too, as it relates to identity and parentage and legacy, was that it took me a really long time to actually understand that, oh, right, Belafonte is my last name too. It's not just his last name. And there was, for a long time, because of, you always want to make sure you're saying the right thing. And then there's, making
Yeah.
sure that, the persona, the outer persona is being
Yes.
well represented.
Yep.
Until finally I realized, wait a minute, I'm Gina Belafonte. I also am Belafonte. It's not like I'm really Gina something else and Belafonte is what I put on when I'm in public with my parents. You know, it's like, that's part of me too. And so I have to find the authenticity of who I am, which, you know, this sisterhood helps me see. And I'm close to I think I'm the second oldest of us. And so I'm saying, like, you know, for me, the understanding all of who I am and realizing all that I can do and be and claim and try and dream is an ongoing evolution of my life. You know, I have never chosen to just box myself in as being one or the other.
And I think that is a perfect note to end on, Gina, that like, it is who you are, it's who you're becoming, right? And you are your parents' legacies, your ancestors' wildest dreams, as the young people say today, right? So I want to express my gratitude. And again, as I've always said from the beginning, I'm humbled and honored to be in conversation with you all. I am a fan. I will follow you, and I know
don't be a fan, be a sister.
You're a
sister.
I'm a sister and a fan, and if I could vote, I would be voting for you.
But we want to make sure that we also very deeply thank you, Crystal.
Absolutely.
Thank the Yale.
Lauren, thank you so much.
Thank you, Lauren. Thank you, the Yale Alumni Academy. Thank you to Yale College, and thank you to all those who came to listen to us today.
Absolutely.
And of course, for more information on Daughters of the Movement, we do have a website. You can go to daughtersofthemovement.com and you can connect, engage with us. We would love to connect with you and engage with you as we're continuing this work and as we are building this sisterhood.
And for those of you who might be on the crazy app Clubhouse, we have a Daughters of the Movement Club coming to a Clubhouse street near you soon.
Yes.
Thank you.
Oh, that's wonderful. I'm going to jump in and say also a great big thanks to Professor Feemster for moderating this session. What a phenomenal job you've done. And I know that you have to go, so I'm going to close us out with just a couple of notes. One is, I want to say one of our guests gave us this comment: rarely do Black women get to witness and listen to such legendary Black women leaders, especially in a space like Yale. And I can't, it can't escape me how historic it is to have you all here today. So thank you for being with us. And lastly, just people should know more about you. They should know more about your families. And so we invite them to visit your website and also to visit the Yale Alumni Academy website. This session was recorded. We will make it available to everyone on the site. And we will also keep your bios and some of your family histories at Yale, because a lot of your family members visited Yale. So that will be available on the site. So on that note, I will say goodbye to everyone and thank you so much for participating. We look forward to seeing all of you guests on the next Yale Alumni Academy event. And panelists, don't be a stranger, come back and speak to us again.
Okay.
Thank you.
In person next time.
Yeah.
In person, yes. Bye-bye,
Good luck.
everyone.
Good luck.
Peace, everyone.